All right, welcome. We're glad you're joining tonight. Tuesday night, 7 o'clock. It is episode 255. And sort of in the vein of what we talked about last week, I want to just kind of continue in a similar flow of thought, but more specifically talking about conspiracies. And so I really did. I worked on this idea for a few weeks because I didn't want to just do a whole podcast about, debunking conspiracies and why conspiracies are stupid or why they have validity, whatever. But I entitled this "Deep State and Your Body." And so, as always, we do really open this up for people to ask questions, and my hope is maybe even to stir the hornet's nest a little bit, because I think a lot of conspiracies are stupid and really overthought, but mainly because of what I think we'll cover in this. And so we'll add some clarification to that. Anyway, in way of an illustration, I read an interesting story, and this is October 30th, so the day before Halloween in 1938, which was a very interesting year in the world. But there was a lot of, as you know, anybody that doesn't know, 1938, World War II is like, that things start popping off pretty quick after that.
I know what that was. I know what you're going to say. War of the Worlds.
Yes. Yes. I couldn't believe that this was true.
Yes. I remember.
But it really happened. Yeah. That's hilarious. So it's funny. As I was writing this, I'll bet Pastor Ford has heard this before. But okay, so I'm gonna condense this whole thing down. A radio broadcast host named Orson Welles. He was on, I think it was CBS Radio, and he was doing a special that they called War of the Worlds. And basically, what he did is he apparently had clarified that this was going to be a special radio broadcast, and that he kind of gave people headway, or warning ahead of time. But some people chimed in a bit late.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna quote some of the stuff he said. Essentially, what he did was he said that some area near New Jersey had been invaded by Martians. Yeah. And so I'm just gonna I pulled some little bits and pieces that were kind of the more extreme versions of what he said. But he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute, someone's crawling out of a hollow top. Someone or something. I can see peering out of the black hole 2 luminous discs. Are they eyes? It might be a face. It might be, good heavens, something wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now there's another one, and another one, and another one. They look like tentacles. There I can see the thing's body now. It's large as a bear, and glistens like wet leather. But that face, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable." And so he really dramatized this whole thing, but apparently people chimed in right at these moments, and people started packing their cars and boarding their windows and calling the emergency lines. Apparently were so clogged that people couldn't even get through to emergency services, and people were literally freaking out, all because they heard a bit of information and didn't have the whole picture. And so it's a funny illustration of what happens when people react when they don't actually have all the info. And so now I called this Deep State and Your Body because Deep State is not, it is a specific conspiracy, but it's also a bit more of a foundation for a lot of conspiracies. And so this idea that there is this like shadow government or shadow group that's made up of like, financial and political elites, intelligence services, and secret societies and stuff like that, that basically are all formulating these nefarious, evil plans to control people and basically run the United States, and actually beyond that, run the world outside of democracy and outside of the public eye. So there's like this secret agenda. And although, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that happened that we don't know about, and maybe there's a reason for that. But at the end of the day, we just don't know. There are things we just don't know. And so you can attach that idea to every conspiracy that's out there. And we could talk about flat Earth. We could talk about recently, the thing that actually stirred all this up is the whole conspiracy around the Charlie Kirk assassination. They could not have been Tyler Robinson. There's
Yeah.
no possible way he could have been at Dairy Queen,
Yeah.
that long after, that short a time afterwards. And so the trajectory of the bullet, and, was he shot from behind actually? And somebody was actually throwing up signals, letting somebody know it was the time. And, that was actually on Charlie Kirk's team. And there's just this drive. And the thing is, it's not just, it's not just random people that are saying this stuff, that are pumping this whole thing. It's people who have a following.
Yeah.
It's people who have a voice and a forum, and there are a lot of people who listen to them. So I'm saying all that because there is actually a biblical outlook on conspiracies. Not, it doesn't say conspiracies, but the word they use is actually arguments, or we translate that word into imaginations, which is very interesting. So, quick scripture. This is not the scripture I just was talking about, but it is a concept that I think connects, and you hopefully get my title here. But Jesus said, the eye of the lamp is the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness.
Yeah.
If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? So, the context of that is very interesting. Jesus talks about prayer, and he talks about pursuing money or serving mammon over God. And so he's talking about people's outlooks and what they want in life. He's talking about, serving God versus serving the purposes of money. And he makes this statement like smack in the middle of all that. And so it's interesting that Jesus is talking in the context of human outlook on life in general, the things you think are important. Yeah. And so, but again, it also in the context of teaching his disciples how to pray, that's how Matthew, words this whole thing. So there is a biblical outlook on how we should view life and how to handle, like I said, what the Bible calls arguments or imagination. So, all right, let's just talk for a second about conspiracies in general. Like, how do you, from your perspective, how do you know somebody's caught up in a conspiracy?
How do you know when somebody's caught up in a conspiracy? I can talk from personal experience, having been caught up in conspiracies before. It's the how to phrase it, the illusion of secret knowledge. Is there's a level of excitement that something not everybody knows. You are a part of the in crowd, the ones who know what's going on, and that's why it's okay for conspiracies, why it's okay for them to exist amongst a small amount of people. You would think that when you have something that is only believed by a handful of people, that, it would be hard for that to get any kind of momentum. But that's actually what gives it its attractiveness, is it's something that only a limited amount of people know, and so it's secret knowledge. And so that's always the case, is you get this feeling of secret knowledge in the Christian realm. For those who aren't Christians, probably won't really be able to relate to this, but in the Christian realm, something that I have seen is these are people that believe that they're actually getting secret information from God. That God has given them revelation that nobody else does. It's commonly referred to as discernment. I have discernment. I can see into realms that other people can't see. And that's its attractiveness, is actually that it's exclusive, it's small, only a few people really believe this, and these are the elite, and so it's funny because it's usually the conspiracy has to do with those elite people, but the people that are actually believing these conspiracy are the actual elite people. Which is funny, when you break that all down, because the reason why they're exposing the conspiracy is because they are anti-elite. Mm-hmm. And really what it is it's a desire to replace the elite with themselves. Mm-hmm. That they're going to become the true elite by exposing these frauds, basically.
So, what is like what's like the big flaw in, conspiracy theories or being a conspiracy? I just call it conspiracy theorist, but more of a conspiracy junkie, because it seems like people that believe one conspiracy often believe many.
Yes, yeah. The big flaw of the belief of conspiracy. And like I said, I have been there. I know what that feels like. I know from somebody who has been deceived by conspiracy, that the big flaw is that it's always founded on bits of information. It's never something that is completely exposed. It's always that's why they're called conspiracy theories, is because they're not conspiracy facts. This is not stuff, because otherwise if it was facts, then it wouldn't be conspiracy anymore. But they're conspiracy theories. It's the idea that I believe, though I'm not sure, I believe this is going on. And so, the idea is that, things have happened, like you mentioned about the whole flat earth thing. The part of actually it's not so much flat earth as the going to the moon, Americans going to the moon.
Yeah.
How the flag was waving in such a way that there's no wind on Mars, so the flag shouldn't be waving. And these kinds of things, which are, these are not, they're not facts that have been given by people who have actually been able to prove this as a fact. Listen, I've been on the moon. I know what it's like to be on the moon. There is no wind on the moon, and so flags don't wave on the moon, because it doesn't work like that. I've been there. I know. I've seen it firsthand, and it's never that kind of a thing. It's always people who know nothing about the moon. They know nothing about the atmosphere. They know nothing about any of the things that are going on that they're talking about. It's somebody said that. And because, gravity, there's, less gravity on the moon, and, why should there be wind, and so it's all just concepts. It's concepts and ideas that, you put them all together. And if this is true, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and this, and the other thing is true, then the conspiracy is true, and so it's like, well, I believe they're all true, and it's like, okay, I mean, that's great, but that doesn't. There's no. You've not brought anything to the table. You've just simply brought your conclusion that you believe that something is true, without any further facts stated. And so that is the big flaw, is that it's usually not covered with facts.
So it's kind of interesting that the scripture that I read, Matthew 6. He says, he's talking about, like, and I'm going to bring this part in the body out in a minute, but he says if your eyes are good. Yeah. And so, like, I kind of want to drill in, like, what does he mean by that?
Yeah, this is very interesting. This is, for me, this is a central, it's a foundational thing that I've experienced it firsthand. In situations of church life, where people believe something, and it's not true, but the reason why they believe it is because of a core flaw inside of themselves, and that's the whole idea: is your eye being evil. In other words, you can see things and warp them. You can warp the way that these things actually are in real life. I'm talking about people who, their ability to be able to see something, and because they have a negative bent, they're able to see the dark side in things. Even if it's not true, it's always a possibility for them, because they tend towards that. They have like people who believe that most people are evil, like that. We'll just start there. That's the idea. Your eye being evil is, I think most people are evil, and there's very few good people. So therefore, you're going to question the motives of every single person and everything that they do, and that's what Jesus is talking about when he talks about your eye being evil, is the idea of distorting what you see. That it's actually distorted on conception. It's not. It doesn't. It's not like that. But you see it like that because your eye is evil. Your eye is distorted. And your vision is distorted, and you're not able to see things as they really are. Like I was thinking that the scripture where Jesus prays for the man, and he says, what do you see? And he says, I see men as trees walking.
Yeah.
Well, that's not reality.
Right.
He says that, but it's clear. No, I need to pray for you again.
Yeah.
It's not, oh, that good. You got your sight back. How you interpret life, that's all down to you. It's like, no, you can't see clearly.
I'm trying to remember the background of that, but wasn't he born blind? It was like
the individual?
I can't remember. So, but basically, this would have been the first time he saw anything at all.
Yeah, I don't remember, but
Yeah.
but the idea, that I see men as trees walking. I would say that's probably, I would say that he obviously has some kind of concept of
Reference,
trees
yeah,
and things like
right.
that. But that's not. Yeah,
No,
you could,
I was
you could go
thinking
into
down-
a kind of a conspiracy there. The idea of how does he know anything about trees? But yeah, no, I know what you're saying, but it's not. I don't think it's so important.
I was more just thinking
to the
of
issue
the
as much as
satisfaction
he
of being able to
sees-
see something, even
Yeah.
though it's not everything.
Yeah, he sees but he sees in a distorted way, and he needs to be prayed for
Yeah.
further clarity. And that's sometimes that's where people are, is they see men as trees walking.
Yeah.
They don't actually see things as they really are. They have a distorted view of things.
So I've read quite a bit about the impact that external events have on people, mainly, and the way it works in their minds, how people process the events of life. We've talked quite a bit about that actually here. You've preached quite a bit on it. But the idea that what you see, if processed incorrectly, has very negative effects inside your body.
Yeah.
And it's very
yeah.
interesting how Jesus actually says that if your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light.
Yes.
If your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness.
Yeah.
And so that concept of seeing things and its impact on your body is actually a biological fact
Yes.
as well. It's
Yes.
something very interesting. So conspiracies, and this is the reason why I, for a long time, I think that the most I've ever been caught up in conspiracies is more just like listening too much to, what do you call it, conservative talk shows. And
Yes.
the
Yeah.
inundation of one side of the argument all
Yeah.
the time makes you think that really that side, another side of the government, they are the deep state. This
Yeah.
is where all the bad stuff
Yeah,
is
I think it
happening.
goes a little deeper than that, though. Actually, I know in my own personal, there was a real revolution in my thinking. So 2016, I had no expectation that Donald Trump would win the presidency. I didn't want anybody else to be president. The idea of somebody being president who was a wrecking ball to me, and that's been my attitude all along, is I want somebody to wreck the place so we can rebuild it. It's like you've got to have a demolition before, where we live, there's all kinds of, buildings that have been here forever, and it's like, if we could just knock these things down, we could build something brand new, and I feel that way in some ways about the government, although the government's a little bit bigger, and I know that, reality is you can't just destroy it and put it back together again. But I always saw Donald Trump from that standpoint. That was always been my thing, is I want somebody, I don't care who they are, I want somebody who's going to get in there and who has the wherewithal to actually go in and change things, because I don't think there's anybody that doesn't believe the government needs to change. What that change looks like is going to be different for different people. But so Donald Trump was, quite clearly somebody who could do something like that. And I thought, he's never going to get in, though. And then so in 20, he wins. I mean, it's just like, bang, he won. It's like, wow, it was like a shock. It's like, wow, maybe there will genuinely be a change in government. And I really did think from that standpoint. I thought there's really going to be a change. And then we got hit with COVID, and then everything all was, the whole world was a different place. And then we have the 2020 election, and he's not the, he's not elected for a second term. And it's like, but that's been pretty typical, for years and years and years. 2-term presidents has been the norm. It hasn't been, a one-term president. So It's like, oh, he'll no problem, no big deal. And then he wasn't. And then all this news came out, and they actually had video footage of the Georgia in particular, from these security cameras, and you see people pulling out,
suitcases and stuff like
they're
that.
they're pulling out bins of some sort from underneath tables, and then opening them up, and they're filled with ballots, and then they're running these ballots, and the narrative was that these are fake ballots. They had been wheeled in from UPS cars or whatever. I don't know how they, how they got there. They were delivered. The idea was they were delivered, and they're just running these through, and it's all fake and all this kind of stuff. And I, looking backwards now, I know how this whole thing played out in my mind, because I saw it and thought, wow, clearly this is the case. You've got video footage. You see them pulling this stuff out from underneath tables and then running it through machines. And so it's like, hands down, caught with your hand in the cookie jar. But yet all the courts were no, this is not the case. Every case was being thrown out. And I'm looking at this, and because I so badly wanted there to be corruption so that Trump could have a second term, yeah, I was already in the wrong state of mind. I was already ready to jump on the bandwagon, that this is corrupt, it's been stolen away. And all the way up till January, I really, really expected that there was a lot of different voices that were being spoken, not just talk shows. There was all kinds of voices that were saying, this is going to be turned around, and this and that and the other thing, and prophecies from these Christian prophets and things like that. And I'm looking at this, and I don't give a lot of credibility to that stuff normally, but I wanted it to be so. Yeah. I wanted there to be a last pullout, that this would not, would be thrown out, and and that would be the end of it. But during all that, I'm talking to a friend of mine who, he's not a Trump fan. He's not the least bit interested in Trump being president, and he's quite happy how things turned out. And he's saying to me, what you're saying here, he says, if this is all true, what you're saying, he says, do you realize what it is you're actually saying here? Is you are saying we are a banana republic. We are no longer, we are just like any third world country. There's no, our ability to be able to function as a respectable country is gone. And I thought, you have to think that you can't have the one without the other. You have to. This is it. The government is corrupt. This is a cover up. It's the deep state. Whatever you want to call it. You have to do that. You have to go there with all this. And as I was thinking about it, I thought, and he asked me the question. He said, "Are you really ready to go there?" And the answer was no, I'm not. Logically, I can't go there. Even though I so badly want this to end with this, 3-pointer at the last, second of the clock, and there it is, and we win. It was like, I don't, that's no, I'm not willing to go there. And then during that time, I found this book. It's a good book. It was actually free as well. It's called Through the Rabbit Hole. I can't remember the author. But it was about conspiracy theories, and I happened to come across it. It was just one of these things that had shown up in a free from Audible. It was one of these, you like this book, then read this book kind of thing. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna read it. And even though it was a conspiracy theory, and I thought, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I don't need to read this. Here I am, believing that the United States is corrupt, and but I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't need to read that. But that was what kind of started me down this road of beginning to read books that when my first thought is nah, I don't need. I'm going to read it, just because I had that thought. And I'm reading it, and it's talking about chemtrails and various conspiracy theories and stuff like that. And it's the author is started a website called Metabunk, and that's the whole idea. Is they have all these people just throw this opinions and stuff in there, debunking all these conspiracy theories and stuff like that. And so he goes through the concepts and stuff about how they get credibility. And I thought, wow, that's exactly what was happening to me. Is it was a thing of where this was beginning. It began with a seed of something that I really wanted to be the case. And so that's a bad starting place for these kinds of things. And so that was really what was going on in my thinking, was that idea, that I want this to be true. And so now I'm just gathering evidence. And that's usually what gives momentum to conspiracy theories, is at the end of the day, there's something in us that wants this thing to be the case. And so it makes it easier for us to strain at a gnat and swallow a camel, like Jesus says, is that we're willing to just overlook, like my friend said, are you ready to declare us a banana republic? Because that's what you're saying. And it's like, no. This is redeemable. It's like, no, there's no, if this is true, what you're saying, this is not redeemable, because we are just finding out about something that is already there and already exists. Yeah. It's like, there's no, we're not going to rise up and fight against this. It's not going to be that
such
kind
a
of
level too.
Yeah. And so it's just interesting, to me, the whole, the momentum of conspiracy theory comes from that, the seed is always, I want this to be the case. And that's the hard part, I think, is being able to identify that, to see that, no, I really want this to be the case, and that's why I believe this. Yeah. And so I think that's the hard part when it comes to, these whole ideas of conspiracy theories and why conspiracy theories stay alive. I remember even through all of that, I remember, when this whole thing of QAnon, and this, certain things are going to happen on certain days, and watch this happen and watch the other thing happen. And after 2 or 3 of those things go by and none of those things happen, is like, how much longer are you going to hang on to this idea, that things are going to turn around when nothing seems to be moving in that direction? And I could see very clearly that conspiracy, the momentum of that conspiracy, was just a fantasy.
Yeah.
There wasn't going to be any turnaround, all these people. And the funny thing is that some of the difficulty that I had during all that was the fact that there were legitimate people that were involved, credible people. And it just kind of opened my eyes to the reality of that nobody's exempt from this. Yeah. Nobody's exempt from this idea. If there's a seed inside of you that believes that something is so, I mean, to the point to where you want it to be so. You affirm that it is so. You're okay with this conclusion. You're willing to lose everything over it. You're willing to lose your reputation, and many people did during that time lose reputation. They lost credibility. And I remember watching all this play out and thinking, wow, this is very, very, insightful into human nature, that we can grab onto things like that. Because there's a unconsciously, subconsciously, there's a something that's already settled inside of us, that we already agree with this. And so we are willing to overlook certain information, and we're willing to overindulge certain information in order for that to maintain the truth of that belief.
So,
and I think my point in that is, I think that's what Jesus was referring to when he said, "Your eye being evil." That's the evil. The evil right there is that predisposition in us to believe something, regardless of whether it's true or not. Yeah. That we want this. It's self.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it is a battle in your own mind to try and get to like. I was going to ask this as a question later on, but I'll ask it now. But do you think it's possible? Maybe not possible. Do you think it's common for like? Okay, you'll have to use your own experience from this, because I know that if I ask this question, you'll probably just clarify. I can't speak for everybody, but okay, speaking from the standpoint of what you've been able to see, and generally speaking, how people think commonly, right? Just the status quo of thought and mental fortitude and the ability or even willingness to figure things out from a logical perspective and work things out from a logical perspective. Do you think it's common for people to believe conspiracies and not let it affect them? and like not have it because
How do you mean not let it affect
so here's exactly what I mean. So like conspiracies naturally they invoke something in your body. They make you feel the sense of fear.
Yeah,
They make you feel like you're out of control.
Yeah.
And those two things alone, you could actually make you feel quite a bit more than that. Anger
Yeah.
and you know jaded. You start seeing life from a very jaded perspective, and then like so you just think, so yeah, well, the government, that's the government, of course,
Yeah.
that's the government. So you just think everything that happens like that, well, the government did that, the government did this, and you know there's this tendency to like lean in a direction like that, which, like I said, those things affect the body. They do something biologically in your body. They increase cortisol levels, which we talk quite a bit about. But what's interesting about cortisol is that even in small quantities over a prolonged period of time, what happens is your hypothalamus is now dictating decisions you start making, and your prefrontal cortex, which is where your rational brain works, is actually dulled in its ability to function normally. And the reason why is because of the blood flow is actually being drawn from that and put into the hypothalamus.
Yeah.
And so your body you start reacting based off of fear, and you start making decisions off of fear and thinking based off of fear. And over time, you start actually experiencing adverse symptoms long term, agitation, digestive issues, chronic muscle tightness, sleep disturbances, and all kinds of issues in the body. So is it possible to believe conspiracies and have stuff like that not happen to you?
Oh,
can you separate the two?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, no, because it's not just conspiracy theories that do that. It's perception. You know, it's just perception in life.
Which is like what Jesus is talking about, your eye being good or bad.
Yeah. So I'm, you know, I mentioned this tomorrow in my sermon is since that time when I read that book, I really started realizing that I need to enlarge my input in life from other sources, you know, that my sources were too narrow. You know, that it was too easy for me to move into a particular camp, you know, about things. And, you know, you have a kind of I hate to try to bring these things together like this because there's so much diversity, even within the groups. But generally speaking, is you have the, you know, sort of conservative Christian idea, and then you have the liberal non-Christian idea, and you obviously have all kinds of other little bits and pieces surrounding all that. But I realized that I needed to listen more outside of the realm of conservative and Christian environments. And the reason is because it was setting up a way of thinking that was overly narrow in being able to process what was going on in the world. I was becoming narrow-minded is basically what I'm referring to. I lived overseas for many, many years. And it wasn't until 2008 that I actually moved back to America. So 2008 was the Obama plus years, and so a lot of things change. You know, the Democrat Party, liberalism, and all that really kind of began to have its rise. You know, from that standpoint. So I'm overseas. I don't care. You know, I'm living in probably, you know, one of the, you know, relatively speaking, made California look conservative. You know, living in England, and you know, because it's a socialist country. And so and the Labor Party was for most of the time that I was there was in charge, and they are the kind of liberal, you know, wing of politics in the world. And so the you know, coming back, you know, for me, I'm thinking, well, you know, America is, you know, self-made, you know, industrious. All these kinds of thoughts that are in my mind are from the standpoint of that, you know, we're not run by politics, we're run by production. You know, we produce things. You know, we're more of a business-oriented because of all the conservative presidents along the years. And, you know, Microsoft was allowed to run wild and create, you know, and AT&T. or was it, yeah, AT&T. They're able to create these huge monopolies, and there was a real struggle, to try to break up these monopolies, because it's like, how do we break up monopolies without destroying business or the government having too much say in business and stuff like that. And so that was my thinking, is government, the idea of government to be small. Well, by the time I came back, that was a conservative Christian idea that had moved from being like the general idea of America to, this is more of a conservative type of a mindset, the Tea Party, the all that kind of stuff was kind of moving in that direction. And then Christianity got kind of blended into all of that. But that all happened while I was here, from 2008 going forward. And so that was a lot of my exposure, coming back, and so kind of a new experience for me. And it was easy for me to, because everybody that I knew was listening to talk shows, and that I never did before. I did way back before I left, in the 80s. I left in the 90s to go to England, but I listened. That was actually the first. I think it was kind of the first, big hit of conservative talk show was Rush Limbaugh, and I left during that time, and so I didn't get a whole lot of exposure to that until I got back. And so I'm getting that, and I'm getting, and now there's a whole bunch of other people as well, and there's all kinds of talk shows, and there's what's her name, Rachel Maddox, and different. So they're all over the place. There's everybody all over the place, and but I'm not. I'm listening to the conservative ones, and those are the ones I'm being told about. And I don't know about these other ones until later on. The only reason I knew about this woman is because Rachel is because of I started looking. Okay, I need to hear some more. I need to hear from NPR and other. I need some other input into my life. I can't just have this one stream, and so in all of that is I just realized I need more input into my life, and that's kind of a little bit long-winded, but that was my discovery, is that I had come back to a place where people were they were zooming in too close on things and not really thinking about what other people are thinking, and so everything is just being divided into camps now, and you have you're either here or you're here. And so I thought I got to get out of this idea of a camp and just start listening to everybody. And I found that as I started doing that all of a sudden all that conspiracy theory and stuff all went away, and I started reading books by people who I would never read books by, and started realizing that in listening to what these people have to say, they're two sides of the same coin, but they have their spin on the information. So the information's the same. And that was the great thing that I got out of it, is I realized, wow, the information they're running off of and the information they're running off is the same information. So I know the information's true. Mm-hmm. It's their spin.
Right.
And being able to see between the spin, because they say, well, this means this, and this other group says this means this, and I'm able to look at it and say, no, that's your camps, influencing you. What it means is something more in the middle of all that, and reading, like specifically reading several different people of the experience of the Capitol. On January 6th of the whole situation, and it's like I'm hearing the things that are being said, and I'm hearing the response from certain people, and there were some people there that they were in fear for their lives, and then there were other people that were there and they were not at all in fear for their lives, and the reason was because of the camp they were in and the people that were breaking in. So the people that were breaking in were from a certain camp. But the thing is that nobody had done anything. Nobody had actually hurt anybody or done anything. And then you hear this stuff, about how, oh no, there was this horrible, thing, and the cops were getting the crap beat out of them, stuff like that. And then you hear the police side of it, and the police were like, no, they were actually being quite, under control, and there was a barrier that was moved, and so are they going to use this as a weapon, and it's like, or are they just moving it out of the way? And so it depended on which camp you were in as to what that meant. And so I realized, when you're reading this kind of stuff and you're seeing, okay, well, they moved the barrier, that's for sure, but their intentions behind it, nobody knows what their intentions were, and so it's just up to people's thought process as to what that actually means, and so then you have how things played out. And you see that there are things that are happening that are based on perception. It's not based on the facts, but it's based on different perceptions of things. And so my point in all that is the idea of that when you stop, being nursing your own personal thing, whatever that may be, and you're able to get information from other places, then you can actually deal with this, but you can't. If you're going to hang on to that, it's going to affect you, and that's the bottom line. It's going to affect you. You're going to be afraid. You're going to be polarized. You can't stop that from happening because you've already let it happen. You can't. It's like you've let the lion out of the cage. Now whatever the lion does, he's going to do. You can't control the lion. You got to put him in the cage, or who knows what's going to happen. So that's kind of the way I would describe it, is that you can't separate those two things. How it affects you is going to be how it affects you. If you let it live.
Yeah. So let's talk for the last few minutes about like the biblical response to. I was going to say conspiracy. Actually, I have it written down, but really it's thinking in general. That is where kind of the foundation of things start. Is that when I got saved, when I really I got converted, I became a genuine Christian, and I have a relationship with Jesus Christ. It was almost like my mind was the thing that really was affected right off the bat. It wasn't even my actions; it was my thinking toward the things I was doing changed. All of a sudden, I didn't want to do the things I was doing because I saw them differently. Yeah, and so. Scale that out to like our perspective on life. And Jesus says, if your eyes are good, the whole body will be full of light, right? Yeah. I was thinking about this in the context of, biblical outlooks and words that would, what words would be used that we could, you could attach, that principle or that lesson to the issue of conspiracies. Like, what does the Bible say? How does that work here? Yeah. And thinking about what Paul says in 2 Corinthians, and he's actually talking about the Corinthians are latching onto outward appearances, and they're really stuck on this whole outward appearance. He actually says that because people are trying to discredit him. And so he says in 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5, for though we live in the flesh, we do not wage war according to the flesh. The weapons of our warfare are not weapons of the flesh. Instead, they have divine power to demolish strongholds, and we demolish arguments or cast down arguments, which is that word imaginations or thinking is actually a better, more simple translation. And every presumption set up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And I remember the reason why this scripture jumped out at me when I was just working through these thoughts is, and it literally was just the word imaginations came into my mind. I was like, I remember reading that somewhere. Where is that? And then I remember this scripture. But I remember right when I saw 2016, same exact thing you experienced. Like, I was actually watching, I had it up on my computer. I was watching the votes come in. And all of a sudden it was like, I went away for a little while and came back and it was like 10 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden it was like in another direction. And I genuinely was like upset. I felt inside. I felt my body rise up. I felt out of control. I felt mad. I was vexed, and I felt something happening in my physical body. And I remember just stopping for a moment and going, I don't feel right. This doesn't feel right. And I prayed, and I remember very specifically God saying, I'm the one in control. And it was almost like I could, if that didn't happen, if I didn't have that kind of experience with God and this kind of relationship with Jesus, I remember thinking I could very easily go down a rabbit hole in my thinking that would take me away from my relationship with Jesus. And it's interesting that he says we take every thought captive, and make it obedient to Christ. And so this whole idea of thinking about how you look at life and how you process your thoughts, he's talking about in in contrast to how the world works generally, weapons according to the flesh, and how it's supposed to work when you are a believer. So how does that, I mean, it almost sounds like there has to be something, and it sounds like this is supposed to be how Christians live, is that there should be something that overrides what's happening in the flesh.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the again, another element of it is it had captured my attention. And that's often, what happens with conspiracy theories is they capture your attention. And that was what was happening is there was a capturing of my attention. I was becoming schizophrenic is the right description of it, because basically it was, on the one hand, there's God, he's in control. I know God's in control. Whatever happens, happens. But there are things that are happening I don't like, in the world, and I don't like the way things are playing out. And so there were these kind of two scenarios. It was like, okay, well, God's in control, but hopefully something will happen here. And, maybe by, prayer and by righteousness prevailing, those kinds of thoughts, because this is an evil that's taking place. And, and all these kinds of things, it's like very easy to, but it's quite clear that that's not where things are going. And that wasn't the case. And things are snowballing in a whole nother direction. And then getting to the point. And, I have to say, though, funny is that knowing history, that's not the first time something like this has happened. This is not like the first congressional crisis that we've ever had. This almost a similar thing happened during the presidency of Lincoln, almost identical, and so it's interesting when you read, and you learn, wow, this is, so all this that's playing out is not a super big deal, the whole idea of overturning votes and things like that. It's not something that's never been thought of before. This is something that has been thought of before and has been an issue before. And you realize, this is not such a big deal. These are the kinds of things that get brought up, and they've been brought up times in the past. It's not like this unique, but that was the whole thing, is that ignorance, was really what was driving my thinking. It wasn't knowledge, it was ignorance that was driving my thinking. And that really is what drives, conspiracy, is ignorance. It's not knowledge that drives conspiracy, it's ignorance that drives conspiracy. And, because the whole flat earth thing, I mean, they literally put out, bounties, that if you can disprove some particular thing, that is their golden calf of flat earth, then they'll give a bounty of $10,000, and then somebody did it, and it's like, oh no, you didn't actually do it. It's like, so we're not going to give you the $10,000. And it's like, well, because the bottom line is that that's not the issue. The issue is not we are positively convinced of this. It's we are convinced of this because we want it to be true, and it's not about whether or not something is true or false. It's about this. We have already made up our minds about it, and that even if it isn't true, we're still going to believe it's true. And that is really what it comes down to when you're talking about the issues of conspiracy. But yeah, in the the scripture that you mentioned about casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself above the knowledge of God, that was the thing that I really discovered, and here I'm not talking about somebody who's ignorant or, just some religious kind of a person, it's like I've been very dedicated to being saved and being a Christian and having a relationship with Jesus and believing that the Bible is the Word of God and all this kind of stuff. And when I began to embrace a conspiracy, I didn't have to get rid of any of that. It wasn't like I had to put any of that away. It was the idea of mankind, which is true, mankind corrupting what God is doing. And that has been the case. We live in a world that has been corrupted by mankind. I mean, that's just the bottom line since Adam and Eve. We've been living in that, and God's plan of redemption. And we read, the book of Judges is clear understanding of, that man can create chaos even under the umbrella of God's observation, is that, everyone did that which was right in their own eyes, and there's all kinds of chaos, and there's, one of the 12 tribes, God's chosen people, one of the 12 tribes is almost genocided, and it's like these things happen, and so it's just God, there's room, for insanity, and the chaos in the world. But I didn't want to live through that chaos. And that was really the issue, is I just didn't want to live in that chaos. And so, but just realizing, God is really in control when it comes right down to it. And now, in 2025, that's a sad history. But it's gone. It's history. It's gone. It's finished. It's over. It was a lost election. No big deal. We had 4 years of Joe Biden, and now Donald Trump 2.0, coming out again. And it's like, but at the time, everything seems like the whole world, is hanging in the balance, for this one pig. And it wasn't true. It wasn't true by any stretch of the imagination, but it seems that way when you get sucked into a way of thinking. And so, at the end of the day, what, I think the great lesson for me, and I'm not trying to write myself a pass or anything, but it was a rough time. We went from Donald Trump amazingly becoming the president, which nobody expected, going into COVID, and then, he's a one-term president, and Joe Biden's going to be the president, which no matter what you think, the one thing that is very, very clear, and I know from the people, at least the people that I know that voted for him, is the reason why they voted for him is because they wanted the same. They didn't want something new. They didn't want something different. They didn't want something improved. They wanted it to just go on as it always does, which that wasn't me, But forget about the conservative, liberal, any of those kinds of things, agendas, stuff like that. It was just, no, Joe Biden's going to get in there. He's going to do his 4 years and going to get out. Hopefully somebody else will just go in and do the same thing. And we'll just have the same, we'll have a president in the United States. We'll just be there and nobody will even care about us, and we'll just get on with our lives. And so some people want that kind of a thing, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. But for me, it was like, I didn't want that, and that was the thing, is that, I was allowing the present circumstances to taint the truth, which is none of this stuff really matters when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
And no matter what happens, somebody comes in and they change everything, and then somebody else comes in and they change it all back. It's like, the Obama years, it's all over, there's going to be, single payer health care, people are going to die, there's going to be death panels, and people are just going to make decisions on who lives or who dies, and none of that ever happened, and it's almost like they just forget about it, and just goes on to, talk about something else. And just the reality, these whole conspiracy ideas. But as a Christian, I should say Christianity, which is probably a better way of talking about it, is Christianity. I'm so glad, to be a Christian, because the pendulum swung back into the middle again, for my life. That even though there was a glitch, in the matrix for it wasn't very long. I mean, it's a matter of months. I mean, this isn't something that took up years of my life, but it's a matter of months from the November to January 6th. I mean, so it was literally 2 months, and so it was like, to get through that period of time, and afterwards, I'm like, wow, I'm looking at it now, the benefit that I've reaped from this, of having learned that lesson, something I'd never experienced before in life, and now I've experienced it, and now it's like, because of stability and wisdom, and God being involved in my life, the pendulum didn't swing to the other side. It just went back into the middle where it's supposed to be. And God was able to, just work, and help me and give me wisdom. I don't think it was any accident that I landed on that book. I think, that's the grace of God's like, here, you need to read. So, you're missing some things here, and you need to get some information. And then after that, now, I mean, it's completely, here we are now. 5 years later, here I am now. I've have become more balanced in my views of government and what's going on and different things. I'm glad that Donald Trump is president, only because I want somebody who has a hammer in their hand.
Yeah.
And I know that anybody who has a hammer sees everything as a nail. I know all that, but my hope is just simply that maybe there can be some kind of change, something that will come out of this, and all the chaos, the tariffs and the crises and everything that's going on, if there's anything to be said about any of this, it's just, for me personally, is I'm just glad to see that there are wheels turning, and gears turning, and hopefully, that, because that my attitude is as long as somebody's trying to do something, I don't care who they are, I don't care if they're conservative, I don't care if they're liberal, as long as they're trying to do something to be able to benefit humanity, then okay, let's see how this plays out, rather than, no, it has to be my guy, and so it's being able to be big picture on all this kind of stuff is really the key, I think.
It's quite liberating, and I think that there's a. I have one last question, but it comes again from a scripture, but it's and it's what I experienced after the whole 2016 election, and I'm not, I don't think any differently now than I did then. As
2020 or 2016?
2016. The whole. Oh, sorry, no, 2020.
Yeah,
the whole loss of the election.
Yeah.
It was stolen.
Yeah.
The whole concept really drove me nuts for a couple weeks. Yeah. But just that revelation of the whole thing was like, the president's not my God.
No.
And it was like I had to say that to myself. The president's not your God.
Yeah.
And Proverbs, Solomon says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge, and He will make your path straight. Be not wise in your own eyes.
Yeah.
And that was and
that's the key.
Yeah,
and I'm willing to admit that was what happened to me, as I was being wise in my own eyes because I wanted something to be. And I was being wise in my own eyes.
Yeah. And
because it was like, I want this to be. I want this to work this way, because out of the two candidates, Donald Trump was much more sympathetic to Christianity. And so it was like, I want him in there. Because I want somebody sympathetic to Christianity, but the reality is it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. But that was being wise in my own eyes. It would be better for us to have somebody in the White House who is, who God can, do things with, that's at least has some sort of, sympathy, for Christianity, and is like, no, it's not necessary. It's not necessary by any stretch of the imagination.
God somehow needs.
Yeah, God doesn't need our help. Yeah, God doesn't need our help. That's the, and the funny thing is being able to, afterwards, obviously, but, at the time of looking through that, how easy it was to get tunnel vision, how easy it was to get zoomed in, so much so that you're looking at all this and saying, if this happens, then that's going to happen, and the other thing's going to happen, and we're all going to go to hell in a handbasket, and the United States is never going to be able to recover from this, and all that kind of thinking, and it's just, the reality is that the United States isn't based on the movements of one man or even one government for that matter. It happens because there's a God in heaven who has. The Bible, it's interesting because the Bible talks about how God has set the boundaries, of things. He doesn't say He set them that they are only like this. He says there are boundaries, and they can't go past those boundaries. And so that's a whole lot more than just simply everything being as it's supposed to be. It's that there are boundaries, and now we may not like those boundaries. We may think, no, you should have brought those, way in here. But no, God has set the boundaries that things aren't going to become chaotic. It's not going to go beyond God's control.
Yeah.
And that is big picture stuff.
Yeah. And the conclusion of the whole thing, I talked about the negatives of being a conspiracy theorist and what it does in your body, but Solomon says in verse 8, of the text I just read, be not wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. This will bring healing to your body and refreshment to your bones.
Yeah.
So here we are. I think Solomon is almost 3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Before all of our modern medical science and understanding of the human body, he's saying something that we are only just starting to really get a full picture of in the last, 60, 70, 100 years, on what this actually means inside the body. And he's saying that trusting in God is actually the opposite.
Yeah, your mind and your body are integral. You can't separate. And modern science is bringing that out. The whole science of epigenetics, the idea of the plasticity of the mind, neuroplasticity, and so that there are things that are related to each other. But the good news being is that these things can be fixed, And my theory, okay, I always need to put that down. Theory, which actually means opinion, is that I think we're going to find. As time goes on, that there's no such thing as being born with a broken brain. I really do believe that. I believe that what we're going to discover is that everybody has a healthy working brain, and the brain damage, is not a physical thing, but a psychological thing, and the effects are reversible. And I think we're going to find, and again, I'm not trying to say that I'm an expert. It just my thinking on this is that we're going to find that things like sociopathy and psychopathy and various mental illnesses and things like that these are all things that are totally reversible. We will find that these are reversible once we can get to the root, and the root is thinking, and being able to correct thinking will correct that. And we don't have time. It's too late now. But the whole connection between how you think, body chemistry, the fact that like one of the things we're talking about right now is a change in thinking.
Yeah.
Is that 2 months of this we're going to hell in a handbasket, to all of a sudden just getting the right information. All of a sudden that goes away. It's not, it doesn't even exist anymore. And there's been a correction in thinking. That has had a corresponding correction in my whole outlook on life. That has obviously had an effect on my mental health, in terms of, how I, if somebody gets in who's a, liberal, anti-God, president, is no big deal. I'm okay. I get this now. I understand, it's not going to affect me. Whereas before it might have been something that could really have made it difficult, for me in life, to deal with stress and things like that, and high cortisol levels, like what you talked about, things like that, that are not there anymore. They're just not there because the root is gone, because I was able to find the root, which was I wanted a certain thing to be, and once I got to that root and was able to get rid of that I want a certain thing to be, all of a sudden it just opened up my ability to be able to see life from a completely different perspective. And then all of a sudden the symptoms that go with all that disappeared. Yeah. And I honestly do believe, like I said, I'm not endorsing any kind of, idea or thought here from some sort of medical point of view, but I do believe that that's what we're going to see, who knows, 10, 15, 20 years from now, is we're going to be able to treat sociopathy and psychopathy and things like that. We're going to be able to treat those things and deal with those things, and people will be able to recover from them. Yeah. Not just be medicated, but actually get over it. But that doesn't mean it's going to go away. I don't believe any of that's going to go away.
The wheels are turning now.
Now you're going to do another podcast. But
yes.
But the idea, no, because obviously I'm just thinking hypothetically.
No, I know, but there's a lot of really good. I've
the idea, the potential, because there's such a strong body, mind, soul connection, that's so strong there. And because I think about it from the standpoint of me getting saved, just becoming a Christian and getting saved, and how that changed me, fundamentally, paradigm shift from everything that I was, in a moment of time. Simply because of that. And there wasn't anything physically that happened to me. It was all the awakening of understanding, the awakening of thinking that reshaped my entire world by that understanding being opened. And so I really do, put a lot of hope in the idea that no matter where you are in life mentally, there is an answer, that coming to Jesus and being saved, having Jesus Christ come into your life and have your sins forgiven, can do what therapy, attempts to do. Any kind of therapy, behavioral therapy or whatever kind of therapy it is that attempts to try to delve into to do, occurs. It occurs by having God open your understanding. And God opening your understanding is powerful, and it doesn't mean that we don't need therapy, at all ever again. No, you can just cancel your therapy, get rid of your pills that you're on and everything else. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that once you have that in place, you have a benchmark, you have a foundation for improved health, both mentally and physically.
Okay, so I have to make a bit of an apology here. Apparently, there have been a couple comments, questions that came in, and questions that came in, and they did not come out on here. And there's other people that have chimed in through texted me and said they can't see them either. But I'll ask them here. They're on topic, but like a long time ago. So we're gonna ask them now as a
Really?
related question. Yeah. So the same thing on the, apparently the video is not working on the Instagram either. So anyway, apologies for the technical difficulties. Those of you that
They
stayed
look
on there.
fine.
Yeah, they look totally fine on our end. And I saw Mariah Ford shot a test in. She just said she was testing it.
Oh.
But I saw that. I don't know if she saw my noted response, but
Yeah.
Anyway, the questions are, I don't know if this relates, but let's get directly to the question. What about people who assume a whole group of people are something? All boomers are fill in the blank. All millennials are fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a conspiracy theorist way of thinking?
Well, it's associated with it, but it's not exactly the same. But it's the same root, though.
Right.
It's the same root. I want a certain thing to be true.
Right.
And that really is the factor. Is the idea.
Kind of like it justifies an opinion.
And you have to understand that this is a subconscious. It's an unconscious thing. It's not something that people are sitting there saying, "I hate boomers." It's not that kind of a thing. It's an unconscious, it's a subconscious prejudice is the word that is used. The prejudice, prejudged. This is how things are, regardless of the evidence. This is how things are, and that's the basis of so it's similar. I wouldn't call it conspiracy theory. I would just simply call it prejudice.
Okay, and then here's another question. It kind of a response to when you talked about being narrow-minded. Only when you listen to what you agree with. When your information source is only things you agree with. The question is how young do you think it's important for kids to start hearing about other ideas, etc.?
That's hard to nail down because they need to know things at different levels, depending on age. It's age related, and that's hard to nail down because you can't just say, because it's also dependent on the child. It's the child themselves. Cause some children are very insightful, and I'm always interested in encouraging that, of wanting to water that by giving them maybe a little bit more than I would a normal kid, but I'm still going to be careful that I don't want to I don't want to, burden them with something that is harder for them to process. So, but I would, that's a hard question to just answer in a blanket statement. But, I always, with my kids, would always try to bring them in. I never sheltered my kids from anything. I always tried to explain it in a way that would be understandable where they were, in life. Not their age group or their mentality or anything like, just what I thought, my kids. Obviously, this is something that I think only parents should be dealing with, and perhaps educators, if they're wise, wise educators, not obviously, educators that are not really, it's just a job, and they're just doing it because they just want to get paid, or they have some kind of agenda or something like that. But generally speaking, I would say that, you have to, each kid's going to be different. It's hard to put that down. But I would definitely deal with the idea, especially when you're dealing with, conspiracy, you're dealing with agendas, you're dealing with people, moving in a certain direction. Why do people think like this, or why do some people think like that? Of giving them a big picture. It's always about big picture. It's never about trying to explain why people are so stupid, because you're just in another camp. You're just one of those stupid people in a different camp. And so the idea of being able to big picture, well, this is what goes on in your thinking. And I always try to do it. I with my kids, I'd always do it from the end. When they would say something, I still do this actually, even with adults, is when they say something like, how come this person is so dumb? When it's a question like that, I don't come right out and say it this way, but I say, well, the reason why is because they're normal people like you, and you think dumb things as well, and here's an example of dumb things that you think. Now answer your own question. You have been dumb and you have done dumb things. Why did you think that way? And that's probably why they think that way. And so I try to do it that way, from that standpoint. So it's like when it's this holier than thou type of an attitude, or, self-righteousness or something like that, I try to subtly just kind of communicate, you're not as great and as amazing as you think you are. And if you would really think about the question that you just asked, this is something you do as well, and so you should know the answer to that question because you do it. Why do you do it, and be able to work through that.
You've said that to me before. It's been a while. I will say it's been a while, but you said that to me before. Jordan, you do that. No way.
Never.
Oh, goodness. Okay, well, that's it for tonight. We're well past time. I do apologize about the technical difficulties again. A glitch in the matrix. I don't know what to say here.
Yeah,
Everything's working out. The video's working on both forums. I'm sorry, guys. Hopefully that doesn't repeat itself. Anyway, appreciate you guys joining tonight. Hopefully you've enjoyed the podcast as much as we enjoy doing them. we do have some fun with some of these topics. So, we hope you can join us again next week, and the week after that, and the week after that. But more than anything else, we'd love to meet you in person. We have a midweek service every Wednesday night, every Sunday morning, Sunday evening. And so if you're in the area and you're not working like a dog and you have some time, make some time to come.
No, even if you're working like a dog, you should still come.
No, what I meant was if you're not working during those hours, because I know everybody works all hours of the night these days. But clearly, Jesus made time to die for us. So I think it's probably worthwhile to at least come and hear a sermon. All right, well, we'll be here again next week. Thanks for joining. We'll see you guys next time. Well, you'll see us next time.